Love to see it. I've got the chat open now so that if you guys post questions, I can see them. Usually Christin will interrupt me though, if you guys post something. So I'm your host today, Sean Spencer, analytics consultant at Interworks. Kent should be showing up at some point. I don't know if he's here or not.
I made it.
Yet. Oh,
he's
there
here.
he
I
is.
already told you in the chat.
I saw in the chat just now. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yes, introducing myself. I've been an analytics consultant at Interworks for 3 years now. My job looks a whole lot like getting assigned to different clients to help them build something new, repair something that's broken, or give advice on just how things are working in their Tableau environment or inside of their workbooks. And Kent has been doing this for longer than me, and he's my boss, which is pretty fun. The plan today is the first thing we're going to do is go over community submitted problems. So I sent out a survey to everyone saying, hey, like, what are some of the problems that you guys are facing? Annie, who's with us today, has submitted a problem. So we're going to look at hers first. And then we're going to dive into some of the things that me and Christin and Matthew and Kent got together and wrote down a list of things that we feel like we run into quite often. And so I'll cover some solutions to those, and then we'll have an open Q&A session at the end. Things to think about is OU Med wants to host us next. So everyone was really excited. I think we had a really good turnout at the Thunder event. And also as of today, we, OU Health, sorry. You know, it changes. So I should catch up though, it's OU Health. Life Church has reached out and also wants to host a Tableau user group. So, you know, the list is growing. We are in demand, which is always exciting. Of course, there's the virtual event calendar where you guys can go and look at any user group across the United States, or there's even special interest groups. I think that recently I felt like I heard some fun things happening in the education specific user group. Matt, I might send you the link to that later if you haven't pulled it up, because I think that could be interesting to add to your lineup of things to attend.
I
As
appreciate
talk about,
it.
like, yeah, using the tool specifically in the space of education. And I don't know that that's limited to like higher ed. I think it's also, what do you call it? Pre-primary?
Yeah, K-12.
I don't know. Yeah. Open office hours is always a thing. So please feel free to reach out to me if you guys have questions or need help with a workbook that might be more complicated than something that we want to cover on this call. I think in the last month, we've had 2 or 3 different requests come through. And today at the end of this, if there's time, Matt and I are going to hang out and tackle one of his problems on the call. So that'll be kind of fun. And then of course, like if there's a specific topic or subject that you guys would like to talk through, let me know. And I can design content around that or sit down and, you know, kind of have like a one-on-one session with you. But definitely want to make sure that we're focusing on the things that you guys want to learn more about. Dates to look forward to would be this weekend, October 23rd. So if you came to the Thunder event, they gave everyone tickets. And so I'm going to go to that. It'll be pretty cool. Hopefully I can see some of my friends there. All right, so let's get started. I've made a quick guide to common problems in Tableau. There are none. Tableau is a perfect tool. Thanks for coming to our user group meeting, everyone. I think this was pretty productive. We can go ahead and wrap it up. Just kidding. This is my joke. This is my attempt at humor. It was pretty good. Common problems in Tableau for real this time. So some of the things that I intend to cover in today's lineup would be default workbook settings. So it's pretty obnoxious to click the same buttons over and over again. So I'm going to show you guys how to avoid that. One of the things that I run into a lot so particularly for me, I change computers a lot. If I'm at the office or I'm at my house, high res monitor scaling is something that I run into quite a bit. Loading custom color palettes and shapes. I don't know that I spelled that correctly, but no one, you know, you don't get hired into a data analytics role because you know how to spell. How to use containers. I'm going to leave that one general. I think Kent should jump in with a lot of opinions on that one, but you can use containers in clever ways to make your life a little bit easier. Showing all the dates between data points and reference lines. Reference lines are an interesting tool that can do more for our visuals than just provide an average or a trend. My last slide. Yes. Okay. So from there, I want to kind of pivot over to our friend Annie and her problem that she submitted, which was, I think I have it pulled up still. How to highlight a row in a table based on a date. Annie, can you tell me more about this problem?
So I have a text table displaying because it's just a list of locations. And
Okay.
I have a user that wants to see those locations by when they were last updated or when they were last created. But I'm going to use last updated. But they need to know if the address has changed. So I want to highlight the whole record with the name of the location, the mnemonic, the address, and the updated date. And I don't know how to do that.
Okay, so if I'm thinking about this correctly, you're telling me that you have a table that has a location and a date when the record was last updated.
Mhm.
And there's another date in there. There's two different dates?
Well, let's just say last updated and just use that
Okay.
date.
Sure. And is this an action that you want to be happening? Or do you just always want the color of that row to be different?
I'd like to, if this record was updated within the last 7 days, to be highlighted.
Aha, okay, so.
And I can show you the table.
Oh, sure. My recommendation on what you've described, I think would actually be different than highlighting the table. I think what I would recommend to you is in the dashboard, having two different tables. So I would create a true false field to identify, has this record been updated in the last 7 days to today, and have that populate in one table. And then have a second table beneath it that has the rest of the records. Does that make sense?
So have a full scale table and then have a recent table.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have your dashboard, and yeah, I would just have one table at the top that's like recently updated, and then I would have the normal table down below of everyone else. That way, you're not having to scroll through the records in order to find the ones that you're looking for. They're already separated out.
Sure, makes sense.
Annie,
And,
that
yeah.
if they do for some reason really want it to stay into one table, you could take that, do like a date diff or something, and have that calculated field, pull that into your color, and then you could base your color off of the true false field.
Yes, that is the answer to highlighting based off of that attribute, right? So you would create the true false field. So if I had like all these order IDs and I had this true false field for if the order was profitable or not, right? I could take order profitable over to color, and we could change this, but we could color the marks, right? Based off of which one is the one you're looking for, which one is not. But if there's a specific record that people want to see, I always suggest breaking it out and grouping them together. That way you don't have to scroll through to like try to find all of the orange ones.
And that kind of limits, I mean, in that instance, you would be preparing that dashboard or that view for that specific use only because, anyway, I mean, right. I mean, that's like, let me create a new sheet. This is solely for this view. If you're splitting them up into those two tables, I mean, versus, like you said, having them all in one table, but yeah,
right.
To be able to identify those, if you were using it also for other reasons, if you were just generally looking at the table, but it was good to be able to see how many were, just to have a visual of how many have been updated. But
for sure.
Primarily for other uses, then you have to go the other route.
Eddie, I hope that was helpful. But if you would like to explore deploying that option into your workbook, I'm happy to help you if you would like.
Yep, that makes total sense, and I appreciate the feedback because I think that would be a better method to have them split,
Sure.
and to have it viewable side by side. Thanks.
Okay, cool. And with that, we will dive into default settings. Okay, so here's something that I find myself doing a lot, and I'm going to show you guys what that is I have this table down here of this area graph. This is just one of this workbook that I'm working in is actually one of where we are in the newest version of Tableau that just came out days ago, 2022.3. Very exciting. Lots of new features in here. Menus are going to look different. I might get surprised. But something that's never changed is me wanting to format a graph and there being these lines all over the place that drive me insane. And so oftentimes I'm coming in here and I'm just clicking like a crazy person, just as fast as I possibly can to turn off all of these lines that are everywhere and checking all of them. And then you think you get them all, but they're still on. And I catch myself doing this on every new sheet that I create to get all of those lines to disappear. There is an easier way. And it's at one of these buttons up here across the top, format. And you can select it for the dashboard or the workbook. There is hierarchy here, but you can go to dashboard. And in this menu, you can define the shading. So you can define the color that appears for any new dashboard that you create. And you can define the dashboard title font settings and the worksheet title font settings. So if I came in here and hit clear, you guys will see how it changes all of it instantly because it maintains the highest level of hierarchy. But I can come in here and I can change all of the titles in my workbook to Tableau regular and size 20 and bold. And maybe I want them blue. And now any new dashboard that I create is default going to follow those rules. If I go to the workbook settings, this is for the entire workbook. I can define, again, I can define those fonts for worksheets, for the book, for the dashboard titles, for the worksheet titles. And I can also adjust those lines. I can go, if I go here, I can turn all of the lines off or to 0, and they will disappear. And then whenever I create something, they'll never come back. So it's pretty convenient. You open up a new workbook, you adjust your default workbook settings, and then every time you create a new sheet, these things won't plague you any longer, and you'll save yourself literally seconds of time in your life. Questions? Okay, cool. The next thing I wanted to talk about was size scaling. So as I alluded to before, I work on a Windows machine, and I moved from my home setup where I have my laptop plugged into a dock that's plugged into a super massive 49-inch wide monitor. And then sometimes I work at the office where I just have a smaller monitor that's like on the right-hand side of my screen. That's like an old Dell. And then sometimes I work just off of my laptop, or sometimes I work off of my client laptop. And the resolution of like these 7 different screens that I regularly visit is wildly different. And one of the things that I found super helpful is one of my coworkers, Debbie, wrote this article like years ago about how to use a manifest file to go in and tell your computer to stop upscaling these images inside of the Tableau software. So essentially, she gives you detailed instructions, but you just download this manifest file and you go in and create a rule inside of your computer's registry to tell it to use this file rather than upscaling on its own. The instructions are pretty simple to follow. Let me know if you guys want help doing this. But what it will resolve for you is text getting cut off and rows not showing entirely when you're on different monitors. Other things that it will solve is I used to have a big issue where I would click a drop down on a formula, but the menu would appear like on a different monitor. And it made it really difficult to click back and forth between them. After I deployed this, that issue kind of disappears. Highly recommend this. I've put the link up here. I'm going to go put this in the chat for everyone. One of these buttons is chat. There we go. Okay. There we go. So the annoying thing that I experience with this though is that you do have to move that file into every new install of Tableau that you do. So since I have like only the correct limited number of installs that you're allowed to have as per the user agreement submitted by Tableau, you have to do it for each new install, which isn't too bad. You just move a file around between the different registries. Okay, questions? Okay, cool. Yeah, so next I wanted to talk about custom color palettes, and I'm going to show you guys how to deploy this. So this is another website that I really like. It's the color tool. So I'm going to post this one into the chat as well, but this is the website embedded right here. There we go. And so what you can do on this website is you can select a type of color presets, and then you can customize that palette. And so right now we have one color loaded in here. And maybe I want this to be like this nasty yellow, and I can add a color, and that one's nice, and that one's nice, and that one's nice. And so maybe these are the 5 colors of my company. What this tool does is it auto generates a text file that you can take. Oh my, I've clicked far too many times. Oh man, it's not going to let me highlight in there. Of course it's not. All right, let's just go to that website real quick. All right, so I've got a bunch of colors. I can copy this text to my clipboard. I can take it. You guys can see my whole screen, is that right? Okay, cool. You can take it to your repository, and there's a preferences file. You can't open that with Tableau like I just tried to do. You open it with Notepad, and you just paste that output right in there. And then you save. Now, when you open Tableau, new one's gonna open up here shortly. And you just choose a regular old workbook. And you go to color. Your custom palette is in there. So this is my custom palette that we just created with that nasty blue, purple, and pink. And those colors will be forever saved into your custom color palettes. It'll also throw in some sequential colors based off of the selections to give you those gradients. Kind of cool. And in the same way that we do the colors, you can do shapes. So
wait, stop on the colors.
Okay, yes.
First, we have a question, but I think Kent is actually fielding it in the chat about, they're asking if that color tool has guidance for colorblind palettes, but Kent, I think, is telling them that just use a baseline of avoiding red and green and go for orange or blue or red or blue.
Yeah, I don't think that this site will make recommendations on color blindness, although that is something that we should all be like more conscious of. Thank you, Kent. Yeah, totally agree. Avoid red greens. This is also a great way I've found. So I work with a lot of clients, and I've worked with a lot of clients in finance. In finance, people really like red and green because red means bad and green means good. But of course, right, this is something that we should try to break them of and try to push them towards a single color and a gray. Yeah, I just find like the color blindness is something that I use as like an extra argument to be like, hey, let's not make this a Christmas chart. But on to shapes. So we saw at the user group that we had last month with the Thunder that they actually have found a great use of shapes for their dashboards. What did they call that dashboard? I feel like they had a clever name for it.
The emoji board.
I think that is what they called it. But where they pivoted away and started using shapes for their marketing emails and to talk about the different segments that they were targeting. So I was going to walk you guys through how you would go about importing your own shapes. So Party Parrot is a very popular GIF emoji to reply to different things. That's very fun. They have different ones of all different shapes, sizes, and colors. And it's the only website that I found quickly that I knew about that I could download these package of images all at once. So if you go to this website and you download the zip file, you'll just have a folder called parrots that has all of the parrots inside of it. And all you have to do is go back to your documents and your Tableau repository and go to the folder called shapes. And then you just copy the file straight in, like I've done right here. And that's all you do. And then once you've copied that file in, you can come into Tableau. You can go to shape and you can hit this button called reload shapes, and that will refresh this shelf. And you can see my parrots right down here at the bottom of the list. And you can choose whichever parrots you want to assign to any of these. So if I wanted this blue one, this yellow one, and this purple one, and this red one, I hit apply, and there's our parrots. It will not capture the GIFs. Unfortunately, it'll only capture like the standalone images. But it's more fun than normal shapes. Some interesting shapes that I've liked to use in the past are like the info icon. I'm frequently putting onto dashboards. So I will create like a circle with like a lowercase I inside of it that I use sometimes, which probably would have been more appropriate to pull in for this phone call. Tableau by default for its containers. So if I drag out a container here, and maybe it's more appropriate to talk about this in the next section, but we'll do it now. If I drag out a container and I put something inside of it, you can turn on that show hide button. And there's a lot of different things that people like to use for these. So Tableau's default is an X and the hamburger. Recently, I've kind of taken an affinity to doing like an eye that opens and closes, which is kind of fun. But those are the more popular things that I'm using custom shapes and images for.
So I believe Josh asked what formats does it support for the shapes? I don't know that one off the top of my head. Maybe Kent does.
I also do not know.
I want to say SVG, whatever the main one that we use from like the Noun project, which is ideally you can pull in images. You can use like a straight picture, The
Mhm.
only thing, if you use a picture, is that the color is locked, so it is static. So if you try to apply color on top of an image, it becomes just a blob of that color. Versus if we use a shape file, it is transparency in black ink. And so when you overlay color over that, then it still works with that new color. So I tend to mostly work with shape files that
Yeah.
you can overlay color dynamically on it. Whereas once you use something with color in it, you're locked and you can't change it.
Yeah.
on
Yeah,
how you
that's
use it.
that's definitely the big one, right? So your PNG or your what is the other one? JPEG, PNG and JPEG. Those two you cannot adjust the color, but on the SVG file types, you can additionally use the color shelf to change the color of the objects. So if I, like I was saying, I have that info icon. If it's an SVG, then I can change the color of the circle and the eye, and it'll still be like this see-through object. That's a good question. Yeah, and if I remember the Thunder were using images of all the other team logos to help predict turnout on matchups. So yeah, they had their projected attendance for each game, and then they had like the logo of the opposing team that would be in the arena for that day, which I thought was pretty good. I tried to find those, but I couldn't find a place to download them all. And I think the last thing that I'll add here is like most of my custom shapes usually get built in PowerPoint. But there are a couple of popular places to go grab them. Christin has linked the Noun project, which is pretty good. If you have a website that you like to go get shapes from, put it in the chat so we can all go check it out. Okay. Any other questions about shapes or colors? All right, we're moving on to containers. So containers are very cool. I like containers. They are very helpful most of the time, but sometimes can be frustrating. Kent has a lot of big opinions about containers, and I fully expect him to dive in at some point in the next few minutes to share his big opinions. But why I like containers is it's pretty rare that I'm working in a workbook that has this auto sizing turned on. I typically am always operating inside of a fixed space. So I will rarely use ranged. I will typically use fixed size of something like 12 by 9, just because I feel like it fills the screen well. And I often have an image in the background, some type of wallpaper that I'm floating objects on top of. And in order to keep their spacing and sizing consistent, I really like using a container. And so you can find the container of the object that you're in by double clicking on the handle for the worksheet. And you'll see that it's selected this container and it's turned blue. And additionally, I can double click that handle to get the container that container is in. And I can continue doing that all the way up to hierarchy. Containers have this nice feature called distribute content evenly. So if I had two objects in here and I wanted them spaced evenly, kind of like I was talking about, I would go check this box. But if I wanted them disproportionate and I wanted to lock the size of one versus the other, you could do that. And of course, like I showed you guys before, containers do have that feature for the show hide button, which you can turn on and off, which is pretty nice. And I wanted to talk a little bit about placement of objects inside of a container. So one of the things that Kent kind of cued me into when I was still learning a lot about Tableau is that down here in the bottom left, we have the two objects of the horizontal and vertical containers. I think that naming them, in naming them separately, Tableau has done us a service in helping us think about what we're doing. But in the reality is that whenever you drag out a container from this object shelf, it actually doesn't care what it is right now. It could be horizontal or vertical. It doesn't define that until you start putting objects inside of it. So if I tried to grab a blank and put it inside of that container, you would see that right now it's just going to fill that container entirely. If I grabbed another one, I can define whether I want it to be horizontal or vertical, which is kind of neat. The next thing to make your life a little easier with containers is talking about what exists for us in the layout tab. And so I'm going to remove this item from the dashboard and delete the 2 objects inside of it. But down here, we have the hierarchy where we can see all of our containers. And we can select them. So this is great for targeting a specific container. When you have a lot of things on the page and you're trying to find the one you're looking for, this is the great place to go to help do that. And so if you can expand that hierarchy and see, okay, well, it looks like this tiled container has one horizontal one inside of it. And that horizontal one has one tiled one inside of it. And that tiled one starts to have the things that I care about, like my dashboard title, this horizontal container that we were messing with earlier, this single floating object, and then this vertical container that houses all of my filters. Kind of like you saw me do before, I don't think that we need this horizontal or tiled container. It looks like we might be using this one for a little bit of padding, but that can be moved to the single one. So we'll remove this. Oh, but then it's going to delete everything. So maybe we remove this one. Remove container. Remove container. And there we go. I find this another thing over here on the shelf to be particularly helpful is you can rename these objects. And so I can call this filters. So sometimes this list down here in the bottom left can grow quite long. And having it named appropriately can really help you quickly sort through these objects, especially as you're developing and building, they're going to move around and shuffle. I forget the exact reasoning behind the order and how they show up, but I believe it's a mixture of alphabetical and the hierarchy on the page as far as like moved to front and moved to back. So things that are floating, I think, will be on further up than the things that are pushed back. Kent, question, or do you have anything that you would add on containers?
Yeah, so one, you had a lot of good stuff there. Would be, I think, for newer users, when using containers, the placement process can be really frustrating. So in particular, things like if you're trying to drop something in, it can be hard to drop an object close to the edge or the very top. So there's like learning the habit of either one, you have to put the new object below what you want it to be, and then you have to move the object above it down because it's really hard to place something at the very top of a container at times. And
I would say like what I'm doing right here is like a big trip up, right? Because like you would expect this to fall underneath the sheet that you want, but it's not going to until you see this container kind of actually highlight.
Yeah, that blue line. And when I did Tableau trainings, I explained it as most people start with tiled, get frustrated, go use floating, get burned, and then go back and learn to use containers. It's kind of the progression of using Tableau. The other one would be just at times when you're struggling to get an object inside of a container, just expand that container out, rearrange your objects, and then shrink the container back down. Don't fight it too much. If it's a small container and it's really hard to place things inside of it, just stretch it out, put things in it, and then shrink it back down. Can make your life a lot easier. And then again, getting familiar with that item hierarchy to be able to navigate where objects are at in the stack makes life a lot easier. I know.
Yeah, see, we're not getting that blue line because the container is so small.
So there's a point where you lose it, and so you have to just resize it to be able to get back into it effectively. That can be frustrating if you're not quite sure what's going on and you miss what's tiled or inside a container or not.
Yeah, there we go. Now we've got it.
Any questions or frustrations with containers that any of you might have to call out while we're at this point?
I have another tip that I do, and maybe it's not the best solution, but sometimes containers don't enjoy putting in multiple visualizations for whatever reason. So sometimes I'll take a horizontal container and I'll just throw 2 blanks into the horizontal container. And then that allows me later on, then I can add my different visualizations into it. And I don't know if I explained the problem very clearly, but it has been something that I've
Along the
used
same
before.
lines, if you have, say, a container with 2 objects stacked vertically, and you want to put them inside a container with another object that's then, say, another stack beside it, there's kind of a sequence in which you don't want to be moving a container into another container as the first object. Whenever you bring in a new container, you want to put something else besides a container inside of it first before you add in, say, that other container with those 2 stacked objects inside of it. Or you have kind of strange results when you just put a container inside of a container where it breaks. The sequence there is to put another object in first, then drag in the container with 2 objects, or else it basically is like, oh, you already have a container, you don't need this one, and then it like drops it, or you lose that one. So there's an order of operations. Now we put those in there. And then another one, if you are doing a mixture of tiled and floating like Sean is doing here, is being familiar with using the shift key to flip between tiled and floating as a way to quickly flip between floating and tiled when moving objects around and placing them.
So if I grab this and I pull it, it wants to snap to the grid. But if I hold shift, you'll see that it'll become floating again. And when I let go of my mouse, it'll float. And then I can hold shift and pop it into a tile. All right. Yeah, if you guys have more questions about containers, feel free to post them. Or of course, you can always send us an email. Containers can be a big pain, but I find them to be mostly helpful. Let's talk about showing missing dates. And I forgot to turn this off. So we're going to work backwards. So let's see here. Where did I? Uh-oh. Pretty sure. Oh, yes, I did it here. There it is. Show missing values. So a lot of the times you have a timeline of events, but points are if there are no observations in the table. So if we think about the data source for this, your data source is this nice, tall, clean structure that someone really nice made for you, and you have this date column inside of it. Sometimes you'll have every day for January, but you might not have every day for February. Sometimes maybe your business is closed, maybe it's a holiday, perhaps those records were just omitted or accidentally deleted for some reason. But what happens is we end up making these charts that look like they're meant to be continuous, but dates are actually missing. And so one of the things you can do is Tableau is quite clever, and it recognizes that you're dealing with a date. You can come up here and just right click on your date field, and you can hit show missing values. And then October 11th is going to materialize for us. Of course, there's nothing to show, but nonetheless, it's now there and more properly representing the trend inside of our data. There are other things that you can do in order to achieve this. One of the things that we're constantly recommending to clients is that if you are a type of commerce business that has days where you're closed or particular events happen that are outside of your control, like bad weather that prevent an operational day, that you can go into that data table and load it in. And you can use the relationship model in Tableau to join those dates to your data source so that you can populate these null values. Does anyone else use what do we call these? I think we just call them date tables,
Calendar tables.
calendar tables, maybe even. That's a better idea.
Yeah, my data engineer and I call them like a date sign or calendar sign.
Mhm. Yeah, when I used to work in e-commerce, the bad weather days were one that we really tried to keep track of, because it would raise big questions for when you're trying to compare a week this year to a week last year, and how unfair that is to the operations team when this year there was a snowstorm, and there's no way for you to materialize that on a dashboard. Yep, so pretty easy spot. Go right click, show missing values. You can also extend the date ranges. You can push them out, but we'll talk more about that here in just a second. Questions about showing missing dates?
I think I'd add that still does listen to, though, filters that are put in context. So if you did want to show missing values for some things, but still exclude some others, I think a regular filter show missing values will still show it, even if like a filter would remove that date. Or there's no record, I should say, in the filter that pulls that date out, whereas a filter that's in context, I think. So you could do kind of some more complex combinations that way.
True. All right, and the last thing that I'm going to show today is using reference lines to push out your graphs. So I wasn't able to create like a fantastic use case for this, but this happens to be sometimes where you have your 3 line charts and they're all stacked up, but sometimes when you have them on a uniform axis, you get where's my drawing tool? You get a view where the highest highs will go almost all the way up to the top of the line, and the lowest lows will like kind of bleed onto the bottom line. And that kind of just makes your graph look a little crowded, like it could use some more room, but because you have the axis set to automatic, you really don't have any control over that. So what you can do is you can come over to your parameters, and here I've created I've created 2 parameters. Oh, I really wish I would stop clicking that. Why won't it let me edit this? Is there, but am I missing something here?
What are you trying to do?
Well, I just want to edit this parameter.
Sometimes you just have to right click a couple times before that menu pops up. Or
It's
click
so
onto something
strange. What
else.
is,
I've seen that. It could
what
be
is
that
happening?
this is
This is what we get for using a new version of Tableau live on the
built
call.
into the data source.
I just made them yesterday. Okay, whatever. We'll create new ones. Great. So, you gonna come in and create a parameter and you call it, you would call it upper limit if that name was available, but it's not. So you're just going to call it upper. Float is fine. And, I'm going to look at my axis and say that maybe 60,000 is a little too low. And so I want it to be 80,000. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to create another parameter. I'm going to blame me not having applied the image scaling to this version of Tableau, and that's why it's not appearing. We're going to call this one lower, and maybe I need that line because right now it looks like it's at like negative 5,000. Maybe I want it at negative 10. Now, if I go to my analytics tab and I grab a reference line, I can come out here and put this on sales. And I can say, I want the value of it to be the lower. And we're going to see our axis adjust and our graph tighten up. And if I come out here to reference line and I put it on sales once again, and I select upper, we're going to see it get even tighter. And now the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to edit this line in the same menu we were before, and you're going to say no line, tooltip, none. Label, none. And now the line cannot be seen. Now, of course, in these parameters, you can make the value of them be dynamic by choosing the option. Okay, now I can edit it. Very cool. Choosing the option to have to pick a value when the workbook loads. So if you knew these values were going to be changing and you didn't need it to be a hard value, you could do that. But if we wanted our graphs to look even tighter together, maybe we want like just a nice flat line. There we go. That looks far less intimidating. Yeah, this is how you can create more space in between your visuals using reference lines to push out your axis. And then you can turn those lines invisible and your view can look a little less crowded or intimidating.
And the value of doing a reference line for this would be if you made it a dynamic thing that say like you could take max value times 1.1 to be
Correct.
a dynamic bump. If it's fixed, then you could just edit the axis and lock it. Like there's, say if it was a percent scale, there would be no need to do something like this.
Yeah, but yeah, to Ken's point, right? If your highs are going to be changing upon a data refresh, and you need just that extra space between, yeah, you could choose some kind of multiple to push the axis out.
I use this mostly if I have, say, 2 or 3 separate charts, but I want them to be of a similar scale. You can take the max value and make an invisible reference line on, say, another bar chart, so that way they show the same scale for display purposes. Is another way to use this.
You can also use these reference lines on not only on your y-axis, but also on your x for dates. So if I wanted to apply the same thing to this axis down here, and if I wanted to bring these values in closer together, I could create lines that move the axis, the value out to like 2016 or something, and maybe like 2025, and that would bring everything a little closer together.
Yeah, to be clear though, you can't push the lines out towards the edge. Like you can't remove that padding that Tableau always adds on the beginning and end of the line. Like that space is.
Oh yeah.
there
It'll
for
so
the
yeah.
reference
I
line.
guess I mean to say that it will remain within this boundary.
You can add more space. You can't remove the space
Correct.
in that sense. With continuous line.
And that really rounds out all of the content that we had planned to talk through. We talked about the challenge that Annie had. Does anyone have any content that they want to cover today? Did I inspire any other questions for maybe something that you guys are running into? Give us a nice awkward pause while I go read some of the messages in the chat. Cool. Well, if you are going to the Thunder game, I found out that I am in one of the sections. I think it's section 210. And if you find me, then maybe I'll buy you a beer if that's what you want. But I would love to meet up with you guys at the Thunder game and catch up and also enjoy some Oklahoma basketball. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask, not related to the talk or otherwise? Or does anyone know of any open positions? Cool. Well, I think I will hang out for the next 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you everyone for coming, and yeah, we'll see you sometime next year when we have our next event planned with OU or Life Church. If you have opinions about what content should be for next year, let me know.
Are you gonna tell us what you're wearing to make it easier to spot you at the Thunder game?
Absolutely not.
Because I've been telling Mike that you're gonna buy him a beer if we find you.
Yeah, you absolutely are correct in that assumption. I don't know. Should I pick a? Maybe I'll send an email with what my fit will be.
I'm just gonna assume that it's flannel or a shirt with your dog's picture on it.
Yeah, I think those are both fair guesses. Trying to think of, do we know what the weather's going to be like on Sunday night?
I think it's gonna be, I don't know, because it's nighttime and it's Oklahoma, but it's supposed to be 83
Between
during the
90
day.
and 30.
Yeah,
Oh, what a great range.
I would guess between 75 and 65.
Yeah, I'll probably wear flannel then.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you what color though.
Set to be about 70-ish, like low of 64 that night, high of 84 that day. So pretty pleasant.
Cool. Mhm.
Do you think the Thunder has a clear bag policy? I know I can just Google it, but
I don't know what that
you have to
means.
think about these things. So like if I go to an OU game, I have to have a clear purse.
I do not think that they do have that. I think that they have like a bag checker at the door who kind of looks in but doesn't really dig around.
I think that's what I remember from last year too, because we went to the Lakers game last year where we won and it was
Uh-huh.
amazing.
That sounds fun.
It was fun.
Policy is all bags will be searched upon entry. Backpacks and bags larger than 14 by 6 are not permitted.
Yeah, I can bring whatever I want, even though I have
What is,
a clear
hold
bag.
on,
for
what are
OU
the
games.
dimensions on that bag requirement? 14 by 14?
By 6.
Like pretty large, right?
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
have a good idea of that, but that's, I mean, that seems basically like, think of a backpack as, you know, a square that's
Yeah.
6 inches deep, like you're in those lines.
Oh no, I can't bring Sean any gifts.
No wrapped gifts.
No laser pens.
What an interesting requirement. Pinwheels or umbrellas?
I always read rules or list of rules as if they were not written beforehand, but had to be added as the result of some kind of event.
Yeah.
So surely these are very specific events that had to happen.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a pinwheel guy and they've got his picture up on the wall somewhere, like look out for him.
Yeah.
No
Well, it's funny
hoverboards.
because in school at TU at University of Tulsa, one of the things the student section would have were like these big giant spinning wheels on sticks that we would like spin around while they were trying to shoot free throws. So that's funny to me. I guess at the professional level, that's they don't allow it anymore.
Yeah, they too attended high school.
Yeah.
In the high school, you know.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. We'll end it at 5 p.m. right on time.
Thank you.